Hey, this is Meridith Elliott Powell. You know what time it is. It is time for Thrive, the show where we dive into the strategies, discuss the steps, everything that you need to know to turn uncertainty into your greatest competitive advantage. And listen, I am super excited today because I have none other than the myth, the man, the legend, Victor Antonio here to talk about something that is near and dear to my heart. What is really the one thing you have got to master if you are going to use uncertainty to your greatest competitive advantage. So, Victor, I am going to start this show and then we are going to dive into this subject. Hey, once again, this is Meridith Elliott Powell. I'm hanging out here with my pal, my friend, my fellow mastermind, sales expert and guru, Victor Antonio. Victor, welcome to the show.
Meridith, thank you for having me on. It's kind of cool. This is the first time we're going to do this on Thrive, right? Because I don't think I've ever been on your show before.
I don't think so.
Super
Now,
excited.
I'm kind of surprised that we haven't done this before, but Victor, there's so much that I would love to talk to you about a sales perspective. And as we were discussing in the green room, I'm going to have you back on here to talk about your award-winning book, Relationship Selling. I want to talk about that. But today, I want to talk about a subject that is near and dear to our hearts. And that is the fact that this world has gotten soft. And let me tell you, I think that all these excuses for the reasons that we aren't successful, all these ideas of crying rooms and the fact that things have to be fair and even and right, I feel like they are selling people a bill of goods. I feel like it is unfair and people aren't getting the opportunity to be successful. So you have this whole idea, this subject of something called the invisible cage. So kind of give the audience an understanding of what you mean by the invisible cage.
An invisible cage, in its most simplest form, Meredith, is that you put yourself in a cage that you yourself constructed. It's that simple. We put ourselves in a cage by rationalizing. I like to say, I always ask people, what does the word rationalize mean? The ability to rationalize to yourself, because that's what you do. You rationalize to yourself of why you can't do certain things. My first introduction to my invisible cage was, I was born and raised in Chicago. My family's originally from Puerto Rico, but born and raised in Chicago, inner city, poor kid, food stamps, government cheese, powdered milk. And I remember, and in our neighborhood, it was pretty much Black and Hispanic. Hardly any Caucasians, Asian. There was just pretty much Black and Hispanic. And I remember, the conditioning that went on in the neighborhood, right? Minorities, Blacks, Hispanics, we're disadvantaged. If you're white, you have the advantages, right? And I kind of bought into that because that was the conditioning in the neighborhood. And I remember, and this is going to sound so bad on my part, but I'm going for it anyway. I remember I decided to go to college, get an engineering degree because, my mother was always about go to school, get the education, get a great job, right? That was the way to do it. That's the way to achieve the American dream. And she was right. But I remember I'm in college, Meredith, and it's like, I'm going to use the anthropological word culture shock in the sense that now when I went to college, it was no longer Black Hispanic. It was majority white, but a lot of Asians, a lot of people from Latin America. Most people think our Hispanics are all the same. No, right? So in other words, I was in this new world and I was like, wow, okay, this is different. And then I remember I made a friend. His name was Mike. Mike was white, Meredith. And I remember talking to Mike one day in my freshman year, and Mike was telling me how he was poor. And I'm like, but Mike, I literally said this to him. I said, how can you be poor? You're white. It's embarrassing right now when I think about it.
Yeah.
He goes, what did you say? He goes, I said, how can you be poor? You're white. And he literally says something, are you stupid? And then, that was like the shattering of the cage, right? In other words, he said, what are you thinking about? And I remember from that moment on, everything I bought into this, I was in this hermetically sealed bubble of lies. And that was the shattering. And the truth started to seep in. And I remember I looked at the data and I asked people this question all the time, like, what is the poorest, when you look at in the US, what is the poorest population, not in terms of percentage, but in terms of number in the US? And most people would guess whatever you're guessing right now.
Sure.
And then I said, okay, who uses food stamps the most, right? Government, aid. And in both cases, I either said Black or Hispanics or Asians, right? Typically Black or Hispanic. Now, the answer is wrong on both cases. The poorest majority in terms of number here in the U.S. is white. The
Wow.
majority of people who use government assistance in the U.S., not in terms of percentage, population or race, but in terms of quantity, is whites. But what happens is they group Hispanics, Blacks,
Yes.
Asian, Indians, Native American Indians into minority. So then they say, well, minorities use it the most. Well, if you look at it like that, yeah. And I remember talking to my Hispanic friends about the white problem. And they go, what? I said, this whole white privilege thing. I said, let's talk about this because I don't think you're seeing what I'm seeing. And I think for them, it was kind of an eye opener when I started bringing up what I wanted to talk about, how poor whites have it hard here in the U.S. And I remember, but anyway, I go back to that story with Mike because that was the first time I go, maybe a lot of things I've been taught are wrong. And that's when I started getting out of my own way mentally.
Yeah, what I think is so interesting about that. Gosh, there's so many places I could go. So many places I could go with that. But let's talk a moment about the truth is everybody has disadvantages in life. I mean, I was born into a fairly wealthy family. Everybody in my family went to college. College was going to be paid for. But I was also born into a family full of alcoholics. 6 male members of my family all died from addiction. So advantage is a funny word. And here's where I feel like we get tripped up is that unfortunately or fortunately, life is unfair. You are going to be thrown obstacles that aren't fair. I don't know why some people are born with 2 loving parents. Some people are not. I don't know why some people are born into families with money. Other people are not. What I think we need to teach people is resilience, is to say that life is unfair. But here's the other thing. When I'm old enough that when I was coming up through corporate America, I was the first female to break the glass ceiling. A lot of the guys hazed me, did not want me there. But the very fact that I was female and good, I feel like I ended up getting advantages on the back end. It was a disadvantage on the front end, but an advantage on the back end. So I feel like I'd love for you to just talk about this whole word of advantage and why we feel like the obstacle you get thrown in life is an excuse as to why others have to fix it for you.
Yeah. I mean, years ago, I went to a Florida Speakers Association, gathering. And I forgot who the speaker was, but he said something that really impacted me. He says, don't focus on what you don't have, focus on what you do have and leverage that to your advantage. And I thought, okay, that's interesting because, we're taught in school, like you got to be good at all these things, right? Like, either from math to art to science, whatever it may be, English. And what I've discovered, and you tell me if you disagree, is that you can't be good at everything. Like there's certain things I'm not good at. I'm not a type A person. I'm not very detailed oriented. My wife is like, she's got that thing not nailed. I'm more of the creative type. And I've learned to lean into my imperfections and make them as perfect as I can. Do you know what I mean? In other words, I'm not good at accounting. I'll try to get as good as I can, but I don't focus on that. What I try to do is focus on what I'm good at, and that is communication, sales, presentations. I focus on that, and that's how I try to generate revenue, and I do generate revenue. But I've realized since I'm not good at accounting, I'll let my wife do that. And if she wouldn't want to do it, we'd outsource that. We know how to do this, right? Whatever you're not good at, just tell thy own self be true. I think that's the big one. You got to say to yourself, I'm just not good at that. And in many cases, if not all cases, it's not that you can't be good at it. You just don't remember that's the whole thing about will and skill.
Yeah.
You can have the skill, but if you don't have the will, it doesn't matter. And every time I talk to myself, I believe in Martin Seligman. I don't know if you remember the book Learned Optimism.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So Dr. Martin Seligman, University of Pennsylvania, talked about the self-explanatory. So it's how we explain things to ourselves that determine whether we're positive or negative, optimist or pessimist, right? And I remember, I asked myself, what am I good at? What am I not good at? And it's not that I can't be good at something like accounting. If I focused on it, I know I could be good at it, but I have no will to do that. And so I've learned to lean into where my will leads me. And then I try to find ways to find other people to do those things that I can't do or don't want to do. And that leverages my time all the more. Back to Seligman real quick. He said, there's 3 ways you explain things to yourselves. He said, the first one is personal. If something happens, as you say, you face adversity, an obstacle, challenge. there's three ways you explain it. The first one is personal. If a pessimist will say, I'm such an idiot. I'm not good at this, right? An optimist will say, okay, I didn't get that one right today, but maybe if I work hard, I'll get it. I'll learn how to do it. That's the personal side. The second aspect was permanent. Pessimists, when they're hit with an obstacle, they make it permanent. It'll never change. It'll never change, right?
Yeah.
An optimist will go, all right, time will tell. Time will tell, right? And the third one was pervasiveness. That's everywhere. You hear this language in people. No matter what I try, no matter where I go, no matter what I try, I just can't win. The optimist will say, well, I didn't win here. Let me see if I can win over there, because they're always trying to win. And when I talk to people and they're telling me their life story or why things aren't going right, I always listen for that language. Are they making it personal? Like, I'm not good at that. Do they use permanent language? I'll never, or no matter what I try. And Seligman said the way to overcome that, if you speak to yourself that way, is to challenge yourself. So when you say, I'm not good at technology, right? Personal, I'm just not good at it. Well, I always tell people that's a nice cell phone you have there, nice computer. Those are two pieces of technology. And by challenging their belief system, you begin to change their belief system. And I do that when I do training. When someone says something, I try to disprove them or challenge that they aren't really thinking correctly about themselves.
Where do you feel like perspective comes from? Because I'm kind of fascinated by this topic in the sense that I just listened to a podcast about a week ago that talked about language, and they said if you use language like I'm fat, I always, no matter what I eat, I always gain weight, your mind will actually start to trip sensors into your body that make it more difficult for you to lose weight. And so, I'm always in bad relationships. I never make any money, all that. What do you feel like? Do you feel like we are born a certain way, or are we socialized a certain way? Is it a combination of the two?
Oh my God, this is like the philosophers Immanuel Kant and John Locke, when they have those two, the two opposing views is nature versus nurture, right?
Right.
And I think it was Kant that says you're born with templates, right? And John Locke, the social contract, says, no, you're born a blank slate, tabula rasa, and experiences are written on this board. And what they found is that they were actually both right, that you are born with certain templates. Genetically, you're born with certain templates. But as you experience things through neuroplasticity, it begins to change. Said in another way, you can't change. Do you know what I mean? It's in you. You're born with some templates, right? Some ideas. But I think that what's more fascinating about your question is when I studied mindset, I always use the word ABC, right? In sales, people go, always be closing. I go, no. It stands for attitude drives behavior. Behavior drives consequence, right? Mm-hmm. Attitude drives behavior. Behavior drives consequence. But the question then becomes, where did attitude come from? And then if you look back far enough, it is a set of beliefs that you've built up over time. And this belief system precedes attitude. So if you think of belief system as like some code, some line of codes in a program, where do they come from? They come from knowledge that you've gained over time, experiences, and the third one would be like social norms, right? Like things that you're told. So for example, like give me a rule that your parents told you. Like my parents always said, don't ever ask for food, wait till it's offered, right? Okay. Like give me one that you have from childhood.
Oh, my mother said, my mother always told me not to bother people, that it was, and I have a total fear of the phone because she told me that I should wait to be spoken to.
Yeah. And never interrupt adults while they're talking, right? So these are codes that are written in. Now, again, that was not from nature. That was more from nurture, how you were raised, right? And so we can go on, and you and I can probably sit here and we can list different codes, right? Things we were taught. So I'll say those are the social norms. Then you've had experiences, and in your experience, you go, every time I do this, like here's one for me, and then you give me an experience rule. Mine is when you lower your price to work with a customer because they don't have a lot of money, those are usually the worst customers because they never appreciate what you have to offer. Like that's a rule I've written, hard coded. Do you have one?
Oh yeah, let me see. That is, if I do not pay well, I will get bad support systems and help. Right. So it is better to pay above what the going rate is.
Yes. In other words, really appreciate the person and then Elevate. So far we talked about social norms. Don't talk to people unless you're spoken to. Experience. Okay, here's what I've learned about my experience. And then over time, you've gained certain knowledge, right? Whether it's about sales, in your case, uncertainty as well, motivation, all that. So again, knowledge, experience, and then norms. This creates a belief system. And so what happens is why this fascinates me, and it ties into everything, even everything with mindset, whether you thrive or not, really ties into your historical past, because your past really drives your current state of mind.
Yeah.
And I'll give you the example. I always tell this story from the stage where I had a drip downstairs, right? Got an office downstairs, and right next to my office is a bathroom. So I heard this, it's drip.
Yeah.
And so I remember I found it in the bathroom, open up the sink drawer, and underneath there's a leak, right? So what do? Like a true man, I go find a bowl
Sure.
in the kitchen, and I stop the leak. And I tell my wife, Shelly, it's fixed. And she's like, really? And the drip gets faster, so I get a bigger bowl, and eventually I have to confront this thing and fix it. Make a long story short, I finally said, okay, I got to fix this thing. And I fire myself up. I go to Lowe's, I get the PVC pipes, so forth and so on. I set the date, Saturday morning, I'm going in. Meredith, it took me about 5 minutes to fix this. And the question after the 5 minutes, why didn't I do this earlier?
Right.
Why didn't I do this earlier? And then I started almost like putting myself on my own Freudian couch. Mm-hmm. And I said, the reason I didn't do it, Meredith, is because years before I had worked on pipes, but they were copper pipes in my house, my mother's house, and I totally messed that job up. And that bad experience carried forward into my current mindset. It became part of my code. Like, I'm not good at piping or plumbing.
Yeah.
So I wrote that under the experience category, right? I'm not good at plumbing. And I had a fight to overcome that. What I didn't realize is that over time, I've learned a lot of things, and pipe technology has changed, but we still hold the old models and we bring them forward. And many people still do that.
Yeah, it's funny. Like I have a thing that I'm always late and I'm always overscheduled, and it's just a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right.
It's because it's the language in my head. Then that is what really. So I was listening to a podcast this morning about manifesting, but it was saying that where you've really got to start is that you've got to change your own personal belief system. Mm. And most of that is unconscious, that a lot of the situation that you're in, and this is a blatant overstatement, but you're in the situation you're in because you put yourself there. Now, I love that, because the moment that I can blame myself, I can change my situation.
Yes.
Like if it's everybody else's fault, if it's your fault that I'm not successful, then I have to stay unsuccessful. If it's my fault I'm not successful, then I can change that. So my question around that is that where do you start with changing the language and learning yourself, and where do you begin to understand your codes, and how do you do that work?
That's like a meta conversation. It's a conversation about the conversation you have in your head, right?
Yeah.
So I would begin with, years ago, I'm sure you read the book by Stephen Covey, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Sure.
So in there, he had this thing, it's based on, Stoicism, which is focus on the things you can control. Mm-hmm. And remember, he had the circle of concern, things you can't control. And then he had the circle of things you can control. He said, don't focus on what you can't control, like the market, politics, regulations, your competitors, pricing structures, the economy up and down, presidential elections. You can't control all this stuff. So then you ask yourself, what can I control? Now, here's what's interesting. When you ever buy a car, Meredith, and after you buy the car, you start noticing your car on the street, right? You start on the roads, right? Now, did everybody buy that car yesterday when you went to buy a car? No. They were always there. But it wasn't until your brain bought it that you started seeing it.
Right.
And I use this example about price versus value. If you focus on selling price, all you see are reasons why you should sell on price. But as soon as you tell your brain, says, no, we don't do price, we do value. Then your brain says, okay, well, then how do we sell value? Then all of a sudden you begin to see ways of selling value. And so when I hear people complain about the economy, I'm like, okay, but you realize you can't control that.
Right.
So let's ask ourselves again, what can we control? And I think about what I think, and I catch myself when I use language like, I wish I could do that. I'll give you an example. I was listening to this speaker this morning, beautiful, elegant, orator, just the way he spoke. And I said to myself, man, I wish I could speak like that. And immediately, because I've trained my brain to kind of check itself, He goes, no, you don't, because that's not you.
Right.
And my brain caught itself. It's the weirdest thing to explain. But as soon as I said that, I go, no, I don't, because that's not me. Let's just appreciate that man's talent. And I
Mhm.
think a lot of people have to listen to how they think. And how do you, the real question is, Meredith, how do you get somebody who's complaining about life to first, as you said, accept that you are responsible? Because to
Right.
your point, you're absolutely right. As soon as you say it's that simple, I'm responsible for all my screw ups. And the thing is, the person who arrives at a bad situation, can we say that there's going to be like 10 or 20% outliers? Life just dropped a bomb on
Yeah.
you and there's nothing you could have done. I feel for people like that. But then I've met people who are in a bad situation, not because they're stupid, not because they aren't intelligent. They just made a lot of small mistakes. And sometimes, that they always talk about, two boats start out at the same point, and if they're off 1 degree, over time that separation becomes bigger. And I think a lot of people have made that 1 degree bad move and have never corrected it. And
Yeah.
they've
Oh,
gone down that track. And there's this effect that's very interesting. When you've gone down a track so far and it's all wrong and it has gone right, it's hard to say, I want to change, because then you got to go all the way back. And a lot of people, it's too painful to start all over again. And they buy into the sunk cost fallacy. Well, I've gone this far, I might as well push this, more. Me, I've learned to cut line, cut bait and just like, let's start all over again. I don't know if that answers the question, but I think a lot of people get in bad situations because they're 1 degree off center, and they've let that 1 degree go on so long that they find themselves in a place, and I think they feel destitute. They don't know how to get back. And that's where my
yeah.
heart leads for.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times too that you're justified
Mm,
in the reasons that life has been unfair. I mean,
mhm,
that to me is like, that is the, there are a lot of things that happen to us that are not fair, that make it far harder to be successful. And I always say, like, the realization that I had to come through, and I remember being on the floor in my home in
mhm,
tears, after a series of really bad situations, and thinking to myself, when is my white knight going to show up and
mm,
rescue me?
yeah,
And it took me about an hour to realize there was no white knight coming.
yeah,
And that if I didn't want to be on this floor 1 year from now, the only person who could change that was me. Now, here's the thing. I was justified in why I was on that floor. I really want people listening to this episode to understand that, if your spouse left you because they've had multiple affairs, if
mhm,
if if somebody just embezzled from your
mm,
company, that isn't fair.
mhm,
But you are where you are, and where I feel like society disempowers people is they spend so much time justifying why you're right, that life has been unfair to you, that you can't find the path forward. I mean, what I like to say is I spent the first 36 years of my life really screwed up because I was so focused on what was holding me back. I couldn't find the path forward.
right. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's a fascinating. That's an interesting line you used.
Yeah.
That society empowers you. It
Yes.
you know what I mean? It almost like society tries to. Society sometimes is a bad enabler.
Oh my God, it's terrible. My
Yeah.
favorite my favorite television commercial
Mm,
is the one for I forget what the drug is, but it says if you're fat, it's not your fault. You have some kind of cortisol resistance.
yeah.
And I thought is that is like the line for society, right?
Mhm,
Like I understand that they're like you do it is not it may be others people's fault
mhm,
why you got into the situation,
right.
but you need to take ownership to get out of it.
I think that, I mean, that line right there, as soon as you take ownership, own it, so to speak, then you can begin to correct things. Again, you begin with things that are within your control. What I love about, the whole circle of concern, getting back to the circle of influence, what you can control, certain things. I always talk about you can control what you focus in on,
Mhm.
right? You can control your attitude. You can control how you invest your time or how you invest in yourself. You're the biggest return on investment.
Yeah.
I'm always blown away by people who are like, ask me, well, Victor, how do you know so much? I'm like, what? Listen to a podcast, watch a video, read a book. It's all there. It's all
It's all
free.
there.
Before, I remember back in the hood, everybody's like, well, we just don't have libraries, access to information. That's why we're disadvantaged. Well, everybody has information now. And, and certain people all over the map, all throughout the spectrum, are whining about what they don't have. I like what you said earlier about, because anybody who knows your story, like I do, and the situation you were in with your husband, is that that moment you have to accept that no one's coming. Remember that,
Yeah.
whatever that movie is, no one's coming. No one's
Nobody's
going to
coming.
save you. And I think as soon as you accept that no one's coming, no one's going to save you. My other pet peeve with that one along that line of thinking is when people say, well, God will find a way for me. I'm good with religion. But God gave you free will and choice. And God helps those who help themselves. So you can't have God be doing more than 50% of the work here. You got to meet him halfway, or her, right? You got to meet him halfway. And I have family members who depend so much on faith, but don't execute within that faith because they've been given certain skills and they're not using them. And I could just almost imagine God going, all right, well, remember that story about it's a guy who there's a flood coming.
There's a flood. It's my husband. It's one of my husband's favorite jokes.
Okay. You tell it. You're probably better at night. You tell it.
I was just going down the same avenue that a flood comes through and a guy shows up in a rowboat and the guy says, no, we're fine. God will provide. So he climbs up to the second floor. Somebody comes by in a, something and he says, no, God will provide. Winds up at the pearly gates and
no, wait a minute. Let's get this part. He's on the roof.
The
helicopter comes. Says, "Come on, we're going to take you to safety." He goes, "No, God will provide."
And he gets to the St. Peter's gate, and St. Peter says, "What are you doing here?" And he said, "Well, flood came, and they said God will provide." And St. Peter says, "We sent you a rowboat, a helicopter, or whatever." And so the whole execute is everything.
Yes.
I mean, I am a big believer that the reason I say that I couldn't find the path forward because I was so focused on what was holding me back is that I believe that the path out of any situation you are in is always there. Yeah. But you have to be of the mind to be able to see it.
You got to find a way. There's always a way. And that's the thing. I tell this story about the squirrel in Minnesota. Long story short, the squirrel always finds a way to get the food because 24/7, 365, that squirrel saying, how do I get that food? And when you have that type of focus, as you pointed out, that type of resilience and commitment, it'll give way. In other words, the end result will give way if you really want it. To sit back and hope things will change is never a strategy. I remember Rick Page said that years ago. Hope is not a strategy. I've always loved that because it isn't. Hope without execution isn't going to get you anywhere. But I think a lot of people, and I feel for them because there's a lot of people who have, like me early on, bad programming.
Yeah.
In other words, things if you accept it as reality and truth. And, when we look in The Invisible Cage, this book I'm writing, I talk about the different isms. The different isms are things that hold you back, right? Like you say, it's racism, right? That's holding me back, right? And so if you buy that, much like you start seeing that car, then
you'll find it.
Yeah. Oh, you'll find it everywhere. If you say it's because sexism or chauvinism, then you'll start seeing it. And the reality is, you've pointed this out already. Life isn't fair.
Right.
I think society, enables us when they go, well, life should be fair. Well, it's not.
Right.
It's never been and never will be.
It never has been, never will be.
No, in the natural state of man, anybody who's read like John Locke, the social contract and things of this nature, you realize life has never been fair. Nobody is born equally rich or equally poor. We're just not. We're on the spectrum, so to speak, of fairness and unfairness. Some people are born with silver spoons in the mouth. All right, well, that's them. I don't have that. We didn't have that. So we have to fight our way through it. And my biggest motivator, Meridith, has always been fear. And people are like, well, fear. Yeah. Fear being broke, fear being poor, fear not having. There's something about that just drives me. I see fear as a positive, not something to be so afraid of that you take no action.
Right.
I fear that if I do not take action, I'll never get out of this hole. So if somebody's listening to this and they're afraid to do something, that's exactly why you should be motivated to do something, because you should be afraid that 5 years from now, you're still going to be in this hole.
Yeah.
No one's coming. No one's going to help you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one of the biggest motivators is pain. When the pain gets so bad, you will make the change. And that's my problem with society enabling, is that you're giving people a reason to not hit the bottom. And the bottom is where they'll make the change. Like, I wouldn't change a single thing about my life. I mean, I feel very badly for, all the trauma that others have suffered and things. But but when I pulled myself up off that floor, is the first time I really gained the confidence that I could conquer anything. And confidence to doing things yourself and somebody not rescuing you
Mm,
is where you gain the confidence to be able to achieve anything you want to achieve in life.
yeah. I think, as you're saying that, I'm thinking that, I've always had this, I'll call it a timid confidence
Hmm.
because, with my upbringing, by that I mean is I seemed confident, but I was like, all right, let's hope this works.
Yeah.
Oh, let's hope this works. And what happened on the road to confidence, on the road of confidence, is that, and this is, I think, to me, this is the magical part of life. When you start doing things in a certain direction to straighten out your life, right? You're trying to get it to go. It's like, I'm not going to call them angels, but people show up
Oh, yes.
and they help you. And it's in the most unexpected ways and the most unexpected people I can have helped me. And I'm like, if I had not done that or put myself in that position because I took the risk, I would never have met that. I can do this whole decision tree of all the things that happened just because I decided to walk down that path. It's almost like they kept throwing bodies my way, and everybody corrects, and tries to help you out.
So true. Well, Victor, it's hard to believe, but we are coming to the end of this podcast. And again,
Darn.
I want to have you back on to talk more
Darn.
about this. In fact, I want to do it like once a month, at least every 6 weeks, if not more. I want to have you back on to talk about relationship selling. But tell my audience how they find out about Victor Antonio. Because I'm telling you, if you are not following this guy, you need to be following this guy. Sales expert, sales guru, but just serious thought leader.
Thank you, Meredith. Everything's at victorantonio.com. Just type in Victor Antonio. I would suggest people follow the podcast, the Sales Influence Podcast, if they're into sales. And just check out you because we're always hanging out together. So it's like
always hanging out together. Listen, I always like to close the show out with giving one piece of advice for anybody out there struggling in today's uncertain marketplace. What do you feel is the best piece of advice you could give them to turn uncertainty to their greatest competitive advantage?
Never aim for perfection, aim for success. And that is, no matter what you do, I assume the stuff I do all the time, like whether it's a new video, new series, it's never going to be perfect. I just launch. I'm just not afraid to do that. If I wait for it to be perfect or to get it right, I'll never launch. So never aim for perfection, just aim for success.
I love that. The very first time I did this podcast, I came on and I was on the air for 30 seconds, maybe 3 minutes, completely dark. Like I didn't have anything. And people ask me all the time, they said, aren't you embarrassed? Like you went across LinkedIn, Facebook, it was Twitter at the time. And I was like, no, I'm not embarrassed. I mean, that's how I learned. I had to try.
We should confess this to motivate people. And that is, I don't think people realize how many screw ups we have. How many things have not gone right? How much money we've lost because we made some stupid decisions, right?
No kidding.
Yeah.
No
and
kidding.
I think people only see us as the end results. There they are. There's Meredith on stage.
Yeah.
People say, they look so perfect. We're not.
So far from. I mean, we could do a whole blooper show, right?
Yes, we could.
No
Yes, we
kidding.
could.
All right, my friend, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, your wisdom, your ideas on Thrive. Everybody, we'll see you right back here next week for another episode. And together, remember, we're going to turn all of this uncertainty into your greatest competitive advantage. I'll see you.